First here at 11, we start with a state execution involving a case from Polk County. David Pittman was put to death for the 1990 murders of 3 people in Mulberry. It is the state's 12th execution this year as Florida laws work to make the process on death row move faster.
September 17, 2025, 6:12 p.m., Florida State Prison takes his final breath and makes history. But not the kind anyone wants to make. At 63 years old, he becomes Florida's 12th execution this year, breaking the state's own record. No other year has seen this many people put to death in the Sunshine State. But Pittman's story isn't just about numbers. It's about a night of pure evil that destroyed an entire family. May 15, 1990, 3 innocent people, a mother, a father, and their young daughter, brutally stabbed to death in their own home. Their house set on fire. A car stolen and burned, all because one man couldn't handle his divorce. For 34 long years, Pittman sat on death row. 34 years to think about what he did. 34 years to feel sorry. 34 years to confess. Instead, as the lethal drugs flowed through his veins, Pittman used his final words to shock everyone in that execution chamber. I know you all came to watch an innocent man be murdered by the state of Florida. I am innocent. I didn't kill anybody. That's it. Was David Pittman telling the truth, or was this the final lie of a cold-blooded killer? Before we find out, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. The answer might surprise you. So who was David Joseph Pittman, and why did Florida finally execute him after more than 3 decades? Pittman was 63 years old when he died, a man who had spent most of his adult life behind bars. He wasn't famous before his crimes. He wasn't a career criminal with a long rap sheet. He was just an ordinary guy who did something so terrible that it shocked an entire community. But here's what makes his execution special. Florida is on a killing spree in 2025. Governor Ron DeSantis has signed more death warrants than any governor before him, 12 executions in 1 year. That's never happened in Florida's history. The state is moving faster than anywhere else in America, and the whole country's watching. Why the rush? Some say it's about justice finally being served. Others worry that Florida is executing people too quickly, without enough time to review their cases properly. Pittman's case is especially troubling. His lawyers claimed he was mentally disabled, too intellectually impaired to be executed under the Constitution. They said his IQ was only 70, and he had been in special education classes as a child. But none of that mattered. On May 15, 1990, when Pittman walked into a family home and changed everything forever. What he did that night would haunt a community for decades. David Joseph Pittman's story begins long before that terrible night in 1990. Understanding his early life helps explain how an ordinary man became capable of such horrific violence. Pittman grew up struggling with learning problems that would follow him his entire life. As a child, he was placed in special education classes, a clear sign that something wasn't quite right with his development. His teachers and school officials recognized early on that David learned differently from other kids. The most important detail about Pittman's childhood, his IQ scores. Before he turned 18, tests showed his IQ was between 70 and 71. To put that in perspective, an IQ below 70 is considered intellectually disabled. Pittman was right on that borderline. Smart enough to function in daily life, but with serious limitations in reasoning and problem solving. Medical records from his youth also revealed something disturbing: brain damage. Doctors found evidence of congenital impairment, meaning Pittman was likely born with these cognitive problems. This wasn't something that happened later in life due to an accident or illness. But here's the crucial question. Did these mental limitations make Pittman more likely to commit violent crimes? Or were they just excuses his lawyers would use decades later to try to save his life? His family life and early relationships remain mostly private. But one thing is clear. The warning signs were there from the beginning. The question is whether anyone was paying attention. May 15, 1990 started like any other Tuesday in Mulberry, Florida. This small town, about 40 miles east of Tampa, was the kind of place where people felt safe leaving their doors unlocked. That sense of security was about to be shattered forever. The Knowles family had no idea they were being watched. Clarence Knowles, 60 years old, and his wife Barbara, 50, were probably settling in for the night. Their daughter Bonnie, just 20 years old, was likely thinking about her future, maybe college, maybe a career, maybe love. None of them knew that David Pittman was planning their deaths. Pittman's motive was as simple as it was twisted: revenge. He was going through a bitter divorce with his wife Marie, and he couldn't handle it. Court records show that Pittman had threatened to harm Marie's family multiple times. He blamed them for supporting her decision to leave him. In his mind, if he couldn't have Marie, then her family would pay the price. But Marie wasn't at her parents' house that night. Only her family was there, completely innocent people who had done nothing except love and support their daughter. Pittman came prepared for murder. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of anger. This was calculated, cold-blooded planning. Before he even entered the house, he cut the telephone line. He wanted to make sure no one could call for help. Then he broke into the Knowles home in the middle of the night when the family was most vulnerable. What happened next was pure horror. Pittman found 20-year-old Bonnie first. He stabbed her 7 times and cut her throat. A young woman with her whole life ahead of her, killed simply because she was related to the woman who wanted to divorce him. Next, he found Barbara and Clarence. These parents, who had raised their children and were looking forward to their golden years, were brutally stabbed to death in their own home. The place where they should have felt safest became their tomb. But Pittman wasn't finished. He set the house on fire, trying to destroy the evidence of his crimes. Then, he stole Bonnie's car and drove it away from the scene. Later, he would set that car on fire too, hoping to eliminate any traces that could connect him to the murders. When the sun rose on May 16th, the Mulberry community woke up to a nightmare. 3 people were dead. An entire family had been wiped out. The Knowles house was nothing but ashes and memories. Sheriff Grady Judd, who was a major in the patrol division back then, responded to the scene. Years later, he would call it one of the most shocking crimes he had ever seen. If ever there has been anyone who deserved the death penalty, it's David Pittman, Judd said. The community was terrified. If this could happen to the Knowles family, it could happen to anyone. The morning after the murders, law enforcement had a horrific crime scene, but no obvious suspect. 3 people were dead, a house was burned to the ground, and a car had been found torched miles away. But investigators were about to catch their first break. The key to solving this case came from an unexpected witness. Someone had seen a man running away from Bonnie Knowles' burning car on the night of the murders. This wasn't just any random person. The witness was able to identify the man as David Pittman. This was huge. Suddenly, investigators had a direct connection between Pittman and the crime scene, but they needed more evidence to build a solid case against him. And that's when they got their second break. After Pittman was arrested, he was placed in jail while awaiting trial. Big mistake. Pittman apparently couldn't keep his mouth shut about what he had done. A fellow inmate came forward and told investigators that Pittman had confessed to the murders while they were locked up together. Jailhouse confessions are always tricky evidence. Sometimes inmates lie to get better treatment or reduced sentences, but combined with the witness identification, prosecutors felt they had a strong case. Meanwhile, Pittman was trying to save himself with an alibi that fell apart almost immediately. He claimed he was sleeping at his father's house during the time of the murders. It seemed like a reasonable defense. After all, what father wouldn't protect his son? But when investigators interviewed Pittman's father, they got a shock. The old man refused to lie for his son. Under oath, Pittman's father denied that David had been at his house that night. His own father wouldn't back up his story. This was devastating for Pittman's defense. If your own family won't lie to save you from the death penalty, it says something about both the strength of the evidence and the nature of your crimes. With witness testimony, a jailhouse confession, and a failed alibi, investigators felt confident they had their killer. David Pittman was formally charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, arson, and grand theft. The case was solid, but now came the hard part, convincing a jury that this man deserved to die for what he had done. In 1991, David Pittman walked into a Florida courtroom to face the most serious charges possible, 3 counts of first-degree murder. The trial would determine whether he lived or died for what happened to the Knowles family. The prosecution's case was devastating. Prosecutor Hardy Pickard painted a picture of a man consumed by rage over his divorce. He told the jury that Pittman had wiped out an entire family, except for his ex-wife. The evidence was overwhelming. The witness who saw Pittman running from the burning car, the jailhouse informant who heard his confession, and the physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. But the most damaging testimony came from people who knew Pittman personally. Witnesses testified that he had repeatedly threatened to harm Marie's family during their bitter divorce proceedings. These weren't empty threats made in anger, they were specific promises of violence that Pittman had carried out exactly as he said he would. The prosecution methodically walked the jury through that terrible night. They showed how Pittman had cut the phone lines before entering the house, proof that this was planned, not a crime of passion. They described the brutal stabbing of 20-year-old Bonnie, the murder of her parents, and the fire that was meant to cover up the evidence. Pittman's defense team faced an almost impossible task. The evidence against their client was strong, and his own father had refused to provide an alibi. So, they put Pittman himself on the witness stand, a risky move that often backfires. Pittman stuck to his story, telling the jury he was sleeping at his father's house when the murders happened. But the jury had already heard his father deny this under oath. Watching a man lie about such serious crimes while his victims' families sat in the courtroom was probably not the impression his lawyers wanted to make. The jury didn't take long to reach their verdict. Guilty on all counts, 3 counts of first-degree murder, arson, and grand theft. The evidence had been too strong and Pittman's lies too obvious. But the trial wasn't over. Now came the penalty phase. Would David Pittman live or die? After hearing arguments about his sentence, the jury made their recommendation: death. The vote was 9-3, meaning 9 jurors believed Pittman deserved to die for his crimes, while 3 thought life in prison was enough. The community felt justice had been served. The Knowles family could finally begin to heal, knowing their loved one's killer would pay the ultimate price. After his death sentence in 1991, David Pittman was transferred to Florida State Prison near Stark to begin what would become an incredibly long wait. 34 years. That's how long Pittman would sit on death row before his execution, longer than many people's entire careers. Life on death row is nothing like regular prison. Pittman spent most of his time in a small cell, isolated from other inmates. His days followed the same boring routine. Wake up, eat meals delivered through a slot in his door, maybe get an hour of exercise in a small yard, then back to his cell. Day after day, year after year, for more than 3 decades. But Pittman wasn't just sitting there doing nothing. Like most death row inmates, he spent those years fighting for his life through the court system, appeal after appeal, motion after motion, always looking for some legal way to avoid execution. His lawyers filed paperwork claiming he was too mentally disabled to be executed. They argued his low IQ and brain damage made it unconstitutional to put him to death. The appeals process is what kept Pittman alive for so long. Every time one court rejected his case, his lawyers would find another court to try. It's a slow, expensive process that can take decades, which is exactly what happened here. During his time on death row, Pittman watched hundreds of other inmates come and go. Some were executed, others had their sentences changed to life in prison, and a few were even found innocent and released. But Pittman's time was finally running out. For 34 years, David Pittman's lawyers fought desperately to save his life. Their main argument wasn't that he was innocent. The evidence was too strong for that. Instead, they claimed something that could legally save him from execution. Pittman was intellectually disabled. This wasn't just a last-minute excuse. The evidence went back to his childhood. Pittman's IQ scores before age 18 were 70 and 71, right at the borderline of intellectual disability. He had been placed in special education classes as a child. Medical records showed brain damage that doctors believed he was born with. His lawyers argued this made executing him unconstitutional. In 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in a case called Atkins versus Virginia that executing intellectually disabled people violates the Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. Later, in 2014, another Supreme Court case called Hall v. Florida made it easier for defendants to prove they were intellectually disabled. Pittman's attorneys believed these cases should save their client's life. They argued that all the evidence, the low IQ, the special education, the brain damage, clearly showed Pittman met every legal and medical criterion for intellectual disability. But the state of Florida fought back hard. Prosecutors argued that Pittman's actions on the night of the murders showed he wasn't intellectually disabled at all. They pointed to how methodically he had planned the crimes, cutting the phone lines before entering the house, stabbing 3 people, setting the house on fire, stealing a car, and then burning that car to destroy evidence. The record shows that Pittman methodically planned the murders, state attorneys wrote to the Supreme Court. He cut the telephone lines before entering the house in the middle of the night, stabbed and killed all 3 victims, and then set fire to the residence. In short, any claim that Pittman is intellectually disabled would run headlong into strong evidence of adaptive function. The legal battle became even more complicated because of changing Florida law. In 2016, the Florida Supreme Court said in a case called Walls v. State that the Hall decision should apply retroactively, meaning it could help people like Pittman who were sentenced before the ruling. But then politics got involved. After Governor Ron DeSantis appointed new justices to the Florida Supreme Court, the court changed its mind. In 2020, in a case called Phillips v. State, the court reversed course and said these protections could not be applied retroactively. This left Pittman in legal limbo. Even though he might qualify as intellectually disabled under current law, Florida courts said it was too late for him to make that claim. The broader debate about executing intellectually disabled people continues across America. Critics argue that people with severe cognitive limitations can't fully understand their crimes or their punishment. Supporters say that some crimes are so terrible that mental limitations shouldn't matter. For Pittman, this debate became academic when the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final appeal on Tuesday, September 16, 2025. His execution was set for the next day. September 16, 2025, David Pittman's lawyers made their final desperate attempt to save his life. They filed one last appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court, hoping the highest court in the land would stop his execution and review his intellectual disability claims. The answer came back quickly, denied. After 34 years of appeals, legal battles, and court hearings, Pittman had finally run out of options. His execution was scheduled for the next day at 6:00 p.m. On his final day, September 17th, Pittman spent his last hours with a single visitor whose identity was never revealed. Maybe it was a family member, a friend, or a spiritual advisor. Whoever it was, they were the last person to speak with Pittman as a free man. For his last meal, Pittman chose comfort food that reminded him of better times: fried chicken, steak, biscuits, chocolate, and soda. It was the kind of meal that might have brought back memories of family dinners or happier days. A stark contrast to the sterile prison environment where he would die. At 6:00 p.m., Pittman was strapped to a gurney in Florida's execution chamber. The witnesses included law enforcement officials, media representatives, and possibly members of the victims' families. Among them was Sheriff Grady Judd, who had responded to the crime scene 35 years earlier. Prison officials asked Pittman if he had any final words. This was his last chance to apologize to the families of Clarence, Barbara, and Bonnie Knowles. His last chance to show remorse for the terrible crimes he had committed. His last chance to tell the truth. Instead, Pittman shocked everyone in the room. "I know you all came to watch an innocent man be murdered by the state of Florida. I am innocent. I didn't kill anybody. That's it." The 3-drug lethal injection began flowing through his veins. First, a sedative to make him unconscious. Then a paralytic to stop his breathing. Finally, a drug to stop his heart. Pittman took a few deep breaths, and then was still. At 6:12 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Sheriff Grady Judd, who had waited 35 years to see justice served, told reporters afterward, "He was evil then, he never changed. This evil man wiped out an entire family." With David Pittman's death, the Knowles family finally got the justice they had waited 35 years to see. But no execution could bring back Clarence, Barbara, and Bonnie. The family that was destroyed on that terrible night in 1990 was gone forever. The community of Mulberry, Florida, had lived with this tragedy for more than 3 decades. For many residents, Pittman's execution brought a sense of closure. The man who had shattered their sense of safety was finally gone. But others wondered if executing an intellectually disabled person was really justice, or just revenge. Pittman's execution made him part of a much bigger story happening in Florida. His death marked the state's 12th execution in 2025, a new record that put Florida at the center of a national debate about the death penalty. Governor Ron DeSantis had signed more death warrants than any Florida governor in history, while supporters praised him for finally delivering justice to victims' families. Critics worried that Florida was rushing to execute people without properly reviewing their cases. Pittman's case highlighted one of the most controversial aspects of capital punishment. Should people with intellectual disabilities be executed? The Supreme Court has said no, but cases like Pittman's show how difficult it can be to prove someone is disabled, especially decades after their trial. Across America, most states are moving away from the death penalty, but Florida is going in the opposite direction, executing more people faster than ever before. 2 more executions were already scheduled for later that fall, continuing Florida's record-breaking pace. The debate over whether this represents justice or cruelty continues to divide the nation. So, what do we make of David Pittman's story? Was justice finally served when he died by lethal injection on September 17, 2025? Or did Florida execute a man who was too intellectually disabled to fully understand his crimes? The truth is, there are no easy answers. 3 innocent people died horribly in 1990 because of Pittman's actions. Clarence and Barbara Knowles never got to see their grandchildren grow up. Bonnie Knowles never got the chance to fall in love, start a career, or build a family of her own. Their lives were cut short by senseless violence. But Pittman's final words, "I am innocent, I didn't kill anybody," raise uncomfortable questions. Was he lying to the very end? Or did his intellectual disabilities make him genuinely believe he was innocent? We may never know the answer. What we do know is that Florida's record pace of executions in 2025 has put the state at the center of America's ongoing debate about capital punishment. Some see it as long overdue justice for victims and their families. Others worry that the system is moving too fast and making irreversible mistakes. The Knowles family tragedy reminds us that behind every true crime story are real people whose lives were forever changed by violence. Whether you support the death penalty or oppose it, we can all agree that families like the Knowles deserved better. What do you think? Was justice served in David Pittman's case? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story made you think, please like this video and share it with others. Subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that explore the darkest corners of human nature. Thanks for watching.